Hello everyone, welcome to my first game theory video. This is yet another in my continuing series of videos discussing various topics surrounding the game industry and game design. In this series, we're going to be talking about the theory behind games. We're going to be talking about how games are made, kind of what goes on behind the scenes, behind the mechanics. And to kick things off, I thought we might start by talking about immersive game mechanics. So this is a theme that I think is more emergent in the past 5 to 10 years. Not that it hasn't always been present, but I think it's gotten more critical acclaim and examination by games as time goes on. And what I mean by that, I think the first thing we need to understand is the interplay between mechanical design and narrative design and how that works in most role-playing games. If you go all the way back to the beginning, you go back to D&D, you kind of have a story being bolted onto a game system, right? Classically, Dungeons & Dragons started out of chainmail, a kind of miniatures war game, where eventually they started bolting the idea of a character onto it, and that character might have a story, and eventually you might even take the role of that character, talk as them, make their decisions. That was kind of how things started. So in that nature, the mechanics of the game kind of came first. The narrative aspects of the game came second. It doesn't mean they weren't as important. It just means that that's kind of how they evolved. And I do, before we get too much further into this, I want to say that I don't have any value judgments here. I think there's plenty of games out there. Some prioritize mechanics over narrative, some narrative over mechanics. It's not an either or. Games can be good no matter what direction their kind of focus is. I'm famously known for Pathfinder, a game where mechanics are kind of important, right? As a matter of fact, they're kind of very front and center. I'm in the middle of this. And I think the thing that's important to understand is how your mechanics influence play, how they influence the kind of feel at the table. Now, if you dig deep enough into this, and I'm going to keep things pretty basic, but if you dig deep enough into this, you'll start seeing folks throwing around the term ludonarrative, and you'll often hear it referred to as ludonarrative dissonance. And ludonarrative basically just means the story that's being put forth by the rules themselves. And when there is dissonance, it means that the mechanics of the game are at conflict with the narrative of the game, right? So that you can feel like something is kind of off or not right. And my favorite example of this is, it's a term that comes from video games, but it does apply to kind of any game structure that has both a narrative and a mechanical component. And my favorite example of ludonarrative dissonance that's actually done really well is Shadow of the Colossus, where you've got this whole game engine that's about killing these giant monsters, and at the end you realize that it's kind of bad, that maybe you're not doing the right thing, that is spoilers, for a very old game, that you may not be the good guy, that you're maybe killing these giant colossi, and that's maybe not a good thing. I'm going to step back kind of from that kind of scholarly thought on this. Not that I don't think it's important, but I'm going to play it a little bit more basic. So in most role-playing games, I would say that the norm, because this is where it started, and certainly with older games, this is kind of the forefront, is the mechanics kind of step in and intrude in the narrative space when they need to. And in most games, they try and do that as little as possible. The narrative is allowed to ebb and flow and be the story it wants to be, and you really only start rolling dice and have people engage with mechanical elements when you have to. Usually that's combat, right? I mean, but in as games evolved and other things became important, social constructs and social encounters and other mini games and other systems built into games, you started to see more and more narrative elements being governed by mechanics. So, and that's continued to today. It started off with almost no narrative elements being dictated by mechanics outside of combat. And now you have games where a lot of the narrative elements, a lot of the role-playing elements, and how good you are at convincing the innkeep to give you a free room for the night, is governed by skill rolls and other mechanical checks. Now, and again, it's neither good nor bad. It's just the way it works. And so you end up in a situation where you've got people sitting around the table, they're playing, and when it comes time for the mechanics to interact with the game, oftentimes it's a break in the narrative structure. The narrative structure opens up, allows this check to happen, and that determines how the kind of flow happens, then it stitches back together and the story continues onward. What I'd like to talk about today is I've got 4 games that I want to talk about that do this differently. And frankly, this is what I call immersive mechanics. They're game mechanics that actually propel the narrative and are almost unintrusive. They're present, they're certainly a part of it, but they actually lend to the story, they add to it, they are a key kind of building block of how the story works. And I'm going to start with what I feel like is the most obvious entry to this. It's a personal favorite game of mine, but let's talk about Dread. So, of all the games on this list, Dread is a game whose mechanics are very, very easy to understand. They are basically, you've got a character, that character is in some sort of horror situation. It's a horror RPG. And anytime you want to do something that's outside of your character's skill set, or maybe there's a risk of danger or doubt, you draw a block from a tower of Jenga. A bunch of wooden blocks stacked up in the middle of the table. You draw a block and you put it on top. And if the task is really hard, maybe you have to draw 2. And if you do it and the tower doesn't fall down, you succeed. That's it. If the tower falls down, you die. That's the game. That's it. And the reason why I like to start with this is because it's very easy for everyone to understand that kind of tactile sense of anxiety and worry whenever you have to pull that block from a Jenga tower. And as it gets taller and taller, and the thing looks more and more like, it's been chiseled away, and it starts to teeter whenever anybody touches it, that is something that is immersive for this game, because that anxiety is what the game is trying to get you to feel, right? So the most common example of this is you're a bunch of teens at a summer camp and there's a slasher hunting you, and you're basically just trying to escape alive, and it's like, oh well, we go hide in the boathouse. Well, does he find you? Draw a block, right? And as the tower goes, and as every time it falls down, you rebuild it, but draw blocks out of it automatically, so it starts more and more teetering and less stable. So the number of times it falls increases as the play goes. This is the sort of game where its mechanical structure, which is very simple, it is draw blocks from a Jenga tower, that's it. It is something that implies directly to the feel and the vibe of the game. It is a mechanic, it does intrude, but of the types of mechanics you might have, hey, roll some dice, hey, draw a card out of this deck, or do one of those sorts of things. This one's unique in that it does speak directly to the feel of the game. Now, another thing I love about Dread that's worth talking about is how character generation works. Character generation in this game, and I guarantee you Dread will be a game I do a from the library on at some point in time. I love this game. I think it's deserving of a deeper look and an exploration in kind of all that it contains, because there's a lot of good advice in it, there's a lot of good stories, there's a lot of good narrative stuff. But another aspect of this game that I like a lot is the character surveys. So when you make a character, it's not about, you don't have statistics. You don't have like, oh, I have a 4 in this, right? There's nothing like that. Instead, you get kind of a character archetype, and then you get a survey that asks questions about a character of that archetype. So let's say we are doing the summer camp, and you're a bunch of teens at a summer camp. You might be the jock. And so you might get obvious questions like, what sport do you excel at, and what's your call to fame, in that athletic endeavor. But you might also get a question like, what's that thing that happened last summer that you never tell anyone about? You get some open-ended questions that are there to give you, the player, a chance to kind of make a character that is flawed or has secrets, and you're basically just trying to create a portrait so that whenever you attempt to do anything, the person running the game has a good idea of whether or not to ask you to draw a block. And it also prompts you to create, as part of your character, secrets and maybe embarrassments or shames or crimes or all sorts of things. And you really can have a character that has a dark past that could come into play, that might be a part of the story, that could evolve over time to be a kind of critical part of the narrative. So for a game with very limited mechanics, it basically has character surveys, and then it's got this structure about pulling Jenga blocks. A little bit more to it than that, but not much. All of those things are driven directly into the main narrative of the game itself. So that's why I love Dread. I also think Dread is a great example of a game whose mechanics kind of get out of the way of the storytelling. You never really feel like, oh, I have to stop and play this game in the middle of this narrative. The pulling of the block is it's fast enough, it's intuitive enough, it's obvious to everyone whether or not you succeed or not. Everyone has tension when you're doing it, right? The thing I find interesting is when you start the game, everybody's kind of at the table. But as the game goes on, people start backing away from the table. They literally don't want to touch the table because they don't want to knock it over, right? So everyone ends up kind of a foot or two away from the table, just carefully watching it because they don't want to knock it over. And that sort of tension, you're basically sitting around a ticking time bomb, keeps everyone on their feet, which is perfect for the narrative structure of Dread. So let's go to my second example of a game with very immersive mechanics. We're going to talk about 10 Candles. This is another horror role-playing game. Interestingly enough, horror games tend to lend themselves most easily to very immersive mechanics. And just as a pause here before we jump into 10 Candles, which is a brilliant game. Most fantasy and science fiction games, it is hard to imagine a way that the players can have immersive game mechanics when it's a science fiction game. You can't exactly get on a spaceship. You can't exactly, I'm wagering people on the ISS could have a pretty immersive science fiction game, but the rest of us can't. Boy, rolling dice in 0G. That's an interesting challenge. But most of us in modern day, in playing fantasy or science fiction role-playing games, there isn't a very immersive way for you to kind of bring the mechanics, bring the narrative to the table. There are exceptions, and in fact, the last game I have in my list here today is an exception to that. That does work, despite kind of not being set in the modern era. So let's talk a bit about 10 Candles. Now, 10 Candles is a fascinating game. It does use dice. You do roll dice. But the thing that sets 10 Candles apart is the narrative structure is the world has gone dark. The sun has gone out. It either didn't rise, or something's blocking it, or it's gone, or the earth is gone. You never really know. You might answer it during play for your individual play session, but 10 Candles is a game all about the darkness. And it is a game that you have to play around the table with your friends, and at the start of the game, you light 10 tea candles. And as the game progresses, those tea candles will slowly get blown out or go out on their own. And as that happens, you get closer and closer to the end of the session, which ends in total darkness. So the mechanic here is that whenever anybody tries anything in a scene, and there are at most, you guessed it, 10 scenes, they roll a number of dice equal to the number, 6-sided dice, equal to the number of candles that are lit. So the amount of light you have determines your chances of success. And when you're making a roll, if you roll any ones, those dice are no longer available for the rest of that scene. And if a roll ever does not include a 6, the scene ends. So the players are often encouraged in this game to play it safe. The mechanics are, you don't want the scenes to end, because the faster the scenes end, the closer you get to the end, the faster you can get to kind of the end of the story. And by the end of the story, I think it's important to note, no one survives 10 candles. At the end, everybody dies. It's about the end of all things. Can be kind of a gloomy game. Gloomy, pun intended. But it's the sort of thing where the players are innately cautious. They don't want to roll dice too often. They don't want to take too many risks. You have to kind of carefully approach most problems. And the more you roll dice, the faster the scenes end, which means you lose a candle, which means now you're rolling even fewer dice, and the characters start dropping and dying and disappearing or getting lost in the night and never being seen again. So, just like with Dread, the game mechanic lends itself directly to the narrative structure, right? So, it's all about losing light, and the only light you're supposed to have in the room are these 10 candles at the start of play. You light all 10 of them, don't blow them out, don't breathe too heavily around them, talk in whispers, because as soon as these candles go out, the game ends. So I think this is another brilliant game. It's a game you probably only going to play every once in a while, because it can be very stressful. It can sometimes be emotional. It can be kind of heavy. Dread tends to be kind of, boy, I'm going to put this in big quotes, more fun, more lighthearted, because it can be like slashers and, oh, we're doing an alien thing or something, right? It can be pretty silly. 10 Candles is the sort of game where, it can be a real downer. The world is coming to an end, and you were some of the few survivors in the end time. And those little candles, as each one goes out, the room gets darker and darker. Everyone's kind of mood gets grim. It has one other component to it that I really like. And this is a component I've seen in more than one game. It starts with everyone leaving a voicemail message to someone. And this is usually something related to your story that you contextualize through play. And the way it works is everybody goes into a different room and sets this recording. And when so it might be, the last phone call they made to their partner. It could be a phone call they made to their child. And this was right before everything went bad, right? So maybe there's some hints of things are going kind of wrong, but society is still functioning. But it's kind of the last thing. So, I've seen some of these that are truly amazing, that are mind-blowing, that are things like, the last call a gambler made to his bookie. And you wouldn't think that's very impactful, except for the fact that the character spent then the entire game taking risks and playing the numbers, and we never knew they were a gambler until the very end. That kind of stuff can be very impactful. So you leave a voicemail message, but nobody gets to hear it until the very end, when the final candle goes out and everyone is dead. You play all of the voicemail messages. Very powerful stuff. And again, this is a game with very light mechanical implementation, right? It's basically rolling d6s and trying to get a 6. That's it. That's all you need to do. There's nothing too much more than that. There's a couple other rules. Each one of your characters has some cards in front of them that you can use as like what drives you and what brings you joy and stuff like that. And that might let you make some rerolls now and again. But that's it. Like, you don't have a lot to rely on. And I think your last card is even your like desperation that you can call on when all the chips are down. Powerful game. Very fun to play. but is a game that I think can be so powerful that you really want to make sure everybody understands the frame of what you're going into and what it means. And you know, it is funny. I think it's worth noting here before we go on to the next game that has this as well. A lot of games with deeply immersive mechanics can be pretty emotionally charged. They can very easily touch on topics that can cause people stress or anxiety in real life. They can oftentimes touch on topics that are, you know, not something that somebody finds a fun element to add to a game. You know, they can really cause people some trauma. And as a result, with most of these games, it's always smart. Always smart to have a discussion beforehand, talk about what the experiences are going to be, what they're going to contain, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. Make sure that if there are things that people don't want brought into the game, you make sure you don't bring those into the game. I do think at some point in time it'll be good. It'll be a good chance for me to kind of do a video that talks about safety tools and making sure that you're running a safe, fun, engaging environment for everybody. It's not this video, but look out for one of those. I'll do one of those in the future. All right, let's go on to game number 3. This is one that I've read a few times. I've yet to play, but I'm about to. I'm pretty excited about it. It's been on my docket for a while now, and that is Alice is Missing. So Alice is Missing. It's not the same. No, it's not the same designer. No, this is Spencer Stark. So Alice is Missing is a relatively recent game, a couple years old at this point in time. And by couple, I think I mean like 5 or something. But Alice is Missing is a rather unique game. It is called a silent role-playing game, and it's called silent role-playing game for a very good reason. You and your friends gather together and play this game without talking. The entire game takes place over 90 minutes, and the entire thing happens via messaging, via on your cell phone or through one of their online apps that acts like a cell phone. So in the end, this entire game, the entire structure of it, is just you and your friends for 90 minutes sending text messages back and forth. And you all play kind of various pre-made kind of character archetypes that are part of the story. All of the randomness of this game, there's no dice rolling. The only thing that happens is at certain intervals of time, a clue card or some sort of prompt is given to one of the players. And that helps move the story forward. And I should say the story here is the story of a teenage girl who goes missing. And this is her friends trying to find out what happened to her several days after she disappeared. So as I mentioned before, this game is one that you definitely want to have a good discussion with your group about beforehand, about what topics people are okay pulling into the game, what topics people do not want to see into the game, because it can be very challenging in that regard. But at its heart, the game mechanic here is literally just texting each other. That is the entire narrative. There is not a game master. There's kind of a facilitator that makes sure the game goes on as it's supposed to. But the entire game revolves around the group of players talking amongst themselves and building the narrative as they go along. This is true of 10 Candles as well. There's some elements of it. Like in 10 Candles, the narrative is mostly built by the players. In Alice is Missing, it's entirely built by the players. Because there isn't someone who isn't a player. As I said, the main driver of this is a deck of cards. And that deck of cards has a variety of different outcomes and way things can play. It has different clues that kind of spell out different possible outcomes. And it even comes down to the fact that, the ultimate fate of Alice is kind of decided by some of these cards. I'm not going to lie. I haven't looked at all the cards because I haven't played it yet. And I'm kind of saving that experience so that me and my group can experience it all together. But its core mechanic fit right in here, right? It is a game where the only real mechanic, the only thing that pauses play at all, are these story cards that come out that just give someone a clue or give them prompts that they can then answer questions and share with the other people at the table through this text messaging. So, very excited to play this. I'd love to talk about it a little more, but I haven't played it yet. So maybe I'll add a coda to this later after I've gotten a chance to play it. But I definitely wanted to bring it up here today because I do think it falls well into this category. Now, this last one is a little different. And it's a little different because it is a game, unlike the rest in here, it is a game that is pretty robust mechanically. Like, it has combat, it has dice rolling, it has complex character generation. It is much more traditional in its play style, in that you've got a person running the game. In this case, they're called a marshal. And you've got a whole bunch of players, and they're playing their own characters. There are adventures you go on. There are big story arcs that you go through. Your characters advance over time by, spending their experience and improving their skills and abilities. If it weren't for its innovative mechanic, it would actually be pretty traditional. It would be very, very much what you would expect from a game from its era. And I do say from its era because it is a game kind of from the 90s. It's an older game. And it has been revised several times since then. And I actually think that by and large, some of the things that I found most innovative about its mechanics are now kind of not fully part of the game. I think there's still some elements of them, but I haven't read the most recent edition. And the game I am talking about here... Wait, what just happened? That's the wrong... There we go. That's really weird. It was supposed to jump to 4, but it instead jumped back to 1. Deadlands. So Deadlands is an alt history game. It is a game where the Wild West went weird. And by weird, I mean really weird. Like, the United States did not kind of take over the West. There are many tribes who still control vast swaths of it. Weird, quasi-steampunk science rules the day. Magic is a thing that is real. And the history and fate of the United States is far different than it played out in our world. Now, like I said, this is a game that has dice rolls, plenty of dice rolls. It's got character sheets. It's got, a standard adventure structure, where there are, antagonists and bad guys to beat and people to negotiate with. And there's lots of different ways you can approach all the problems in the game. So you might be wondering yourself, what about it is immersive? And I say this as I love Deadlands. I love it for its mechanics. I think there are some elements of its story that are pretty dated, but the thing I love most about this game is the fact that when you cast a spell, in the original version, you draw a poker hand, and how good the hand is determines how powerful the spell is. That's genius. That is literally genius. I love it. I love it to death. I think it is one of the best game mechanics I have ever encountered. I am jealous of it to this day. I absolutely love how that mechanic works. It plays directly into the themes of the Wild West, of, sitting down at a poker table and having a shootout. In fact, I believe there's even a special rule that if you draw the dead man's hand, something really bad happens to you, so don't draw that. Now, that isn't the only thing this game has either. It also encourages you to use a bag of poker chips as a way to give people experience points. So oftentimes at the end of the game, you get to draw from the bag, and those are your experience points. But you can spend those poker chips like some variant of hero points, depending on the quality of the chip, right? So you got blue chips, white chips, red chips. You can even put special chips in there. And when people get them, they have various effects. And you can turn the chips in. You can cash in to level up your character and gain additional powers. But if you hold on to some of those chips, you can also use them during play to alter your die rolls, to re-roll, to add additional dice to your rolls. I adore this game. I think it is definitely worth checking out. The original version of it was a very robust game with a lot of different expansions, a lot of different additional rules elements. But to me, the thing that made it just incredibly worth it was it used a poker deck and poker chips as part of the game's central theme. That's pretty good stuff, right? I think there's something to that although you do still stop and combat is complicated and a whole thing, like initiative is done by drawing cards from the poker deck as well. And the entire thing kind of plays out in a way that it does feel evocative of the setting that you're playing. I think it still has some of the issues of like the mechanics do kind of slow down play. They do break the narrative, but it does really help. Especially when if you're playing, say, a huckster, which is the character that can cast spells. You know, drawing a hand of cards, that wasn't just a thing you did at the game table. Your character would draw a hand of cards too, and that's how you determine, you know, in play how powerful the spell was. So really fun stuff there. I think there's something really evocative about that. Like I said, the game itself, you know, it's aged better than you might think, but there's still some aspects of it that I think would be done very differently today. And the Wild West is obviously a problematic time for the U.S. This game does try to rectify some of that by giving the Native Americans a lot more agency and power. They're not just overrun by the American government and resettled. There's some elements like that I think are interesting to play around with. Again, something you want to talk to your group about, and you know, maybe excise some parts of it that you're not comfortable with. That's fine. You can do that with any game you play. But I do think that you know, if you look back across all the games we got on the list here today, some of them have almost no mechanics to them at all. I actually think Alice is Missing technically doesn't have any kind of random game elements at all. It's just a storytelling framework. Dread is probably the next on the list with, it does have a mechanic in that you draw Jenga blocks and if it falls down you die. But other than that, there's no numbers or statistics. 10 Candles, at least you're rolling a bunch of dice. There is a kind of base mechanic there that talks about, you know, whether or not you can re-roll dice and how many dice you're rolling. But there's no statistics or anything like that. And then, frankly, between those three, which are pretty tightly grouped on one end, the other end is Deadlands, which is a game with a very robust mechanical structure and underpinning. Not the most robust RPG I've ever played, but still a lot of bells and whistles. But it still manages to get those immersive mechanics. So, in the end, you know, where does that leave us? What point am I trying to make here? My point is that you can always find ways when you're designing your game, even if it's a light game, if it's a heavy game, you know, you can find a way to make the mechanics speak more directly to the narrative. There's small ways you can do that where, you know, for you know, one session when you're playing Pathfinder, you know, there is someone does a hero reading and you make that part of the play experience, and what cards get drawn affect play. They've certainly done some adventures like that. I've seen, you know, obviously horror themed adventures where, you know, there are candy elements and things like that where you can add those sorts of mechanics to the game. There's plenty of ways that you can explore doing this, right? You could have a modern game where all the players are playing, you know, EMTs or something, and you play Operation, literally to determine success and failure. Don't touch the sides, right? I mean, you know, there's plenty of ways where you can make the actual action of play have a stronger tie to the narrative other than just pick up dice and roll them. And that's not to cast shade on doing that. You know, honestly, I make a living off making games that do that. But I do think that there is something special about games. They can create a very special experience when the gameplay, when the narrative play, when those two things start speaking to each other in a way that is more than just one informing the other. You know, I think that is what makes most role-playing games special. They all have it to one degree or another, but the more those two come in sync, the more the game's tone and tale really can feel like a seamless experience at the table. Well, a little bit shorter here today than some of my previous ones, but I think this was a fun topic to talk over. I do want to thank all of my patrons for their support. Videos like this are made possible through my Patreon. My patrons get access to these videos live when they're recorded. They also get access to a live Q&A after the video is done, which we're going to do here in just a few moments. So thank you for watching, everybody. I'll see you next week for more from my Patreon. Take care, everybody.